Welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Stephen Carroll. My guest today is a leading voice highlighting the inequality created by capitalism and the free market system. Joseph Stiglitz is a Nobel laureate, Columbia University professor and former chief economist of the World Bank. Thank you very much.
Nice to be here.
For coming to see us. Your latest book, People, Power and Profits, looks at, People, Power and Profits, Progressive Capitalism for an Age of Discontent. It's just been published in French. In it, you look at some of the causes of inequality, but also propose some solutions that policymakers could look at. My first question, Joseph Stiglitz, is this a handbook for the Democratic candidates hoping to be up against Donald Trump next year?
I hope so. I wrote it to provide a sort of the intellectual framework for the agenda of the progressive Democrats. And most of the ideas are ideas that have been discussed by many of the progressive Democrats. But what I try to do is put a framework around it and to link it to what economics has to say and what politics has to say, and to show how politics and economics have to be linked together.
Have you been advising any of the candidates? I've
been talking to many of them.
Do you have any that you're particularly being impressed by, someone you're supporting?
There are several of them I'm impressed with. I think that most of the progressive Democratic candidates have come forward with really interesting ideas that have engaged a lot of Americans. They're very thoughtful, and it's actually having an impact. I mean, for instance, one of the ideas that has been put forward is that we have to move from shareholder capitalism, where firms only advance the interest of shareholders, to stakeholder capitalism, where you have to think about the workers, the customers, the communities in which the firms operate. And now we see all the major leaders of American corporations signing on to an agenda of stakeholder capitalism. So even before we get legislation, we're actually having some success in changing the mindset of Americans.
So among those leading names, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, do you have a favorite?
I have. I think they each have their strength. In the end, I think what I care about and what everybody cares about is getting rid of the real danger to the United States and to the world, which is getting rid of Donald Trump.
And is that realistic? Do you think that they have a reasonable chance of defeating Donald Trump?
More than 50-50. I think they are presenting a positive agenda for where the country can go and restoring America's leadership, as opposed to the very divisive agenda, which is trying to set one American against the other. There's an old expression, a country divided cannot stand, and he's been trying to divide the country more and more.
We've had this news that they're going to proceed with impeachment proceedings against the president. Should they have done this sooner? Do you think it'll have any effect?
I think it will have an effect, possibly in the long run, if not in the short run. No one is above the law. And the president has to be held accountable, even if the Republicans in the Senate abrogate their responsibility, even though he has violated the basic principles of the Constitution. If they fail, that's their problem. But at least the House of Representatives has to do their duty. I think it is important for Americans to understand the nature of the crimes and misdemeanors, to put it in the language of the Constitution, that have been committed. That there are conflicts of interest, it's abuse of power, let alone the lying. We're not talking about the undermining of the basic norms of what represent the presidency.
But the process has little chance of succeeding with the Republican majority in the Senate.
One has to remember where the country was at the time that the Watergate, the Nixon impeachment process began. And at that time, nobody thought it would be successful. But there came a moment where everybody said, this person, Nixon, has violated his constitutional responsibilities. And at that point, even the Republicans had to support it. And there wasn't a vote. He resigned because he saw where things were going.
Do you believe the same thing could happen now?
I don't. I think Trump is more obstinate than even Nixon was. But I think the nature of his misdemeanor, what he's done wrong, will react with the American people, and I think there'll be a lot of concern. But as I said, even if it doesn't come to removing him, the fact that in the process of holding him accountable, Americans will get a renewed confidence in our democracy and a renewed reason why we have to support the Democrats, because if the Republicans do not show any sign of standing by our democracy, it will be a reason why a lot of voters will say, we don't want to vote for those. That President Trump has behaved very badly, and yet the Republicans have continued to support him in his lies and his other aspects of his bad behavior. That's not American.
Okay. And back to the economics for a moment. What sort of economy do you think those candidates will be dealing with when it comes up to the election next year? We have warnings of a slowdown, but the American economy is still growing. Unemployment is still very low. Where do you see things going?
The economy will be weaker. It is astounding in some ways that even with a $1 trillion deficit this year, which should create a boom in the economy, we should be going gangbusters, to use an American expression, how weak the economy is expected to be, growing less than 2% next year. It is very clear that there's been bad economic management, because with that level of stimulus, a well-managed economy should be growing at 3-4%.
Does that bad management include, do you think, the trade dispute with China?
Trade dispute with China is an important piece of it. The design of the tax bill, which lowered taxes for the billionaires and for the corporations, but resulted in an increase in the taxes for a majority of Americans in the middle, in a country facing the highest level of inequality of any of the advanced countries. A tax bill which taxed our major research institutions like Harvard and Princeton, in a world where we're supposed to be an innovation economy. Will
the effects of that then continue, do you think, beyond the short term if it's attacking elements of the economy like that?
Oh, I think it will. It will be a hard job to recover. It won't happen overnight, and it will be a slow process. But all the more important for there to be a Democratic candidate in 2021. If we have 4 more years of this, the damage will be all the harder to repair, especially because he is finally beginning to erode the strength of our institutions. The judiciary has been very clear, but the bureaucracy, every society needs an independent bureaucracy that does the work of making government work. And he's been attacking it. Our State Department is suffering. Our environmental agencies are suffering. They're all suffering.
One of the issues, I suppose, that's being highlighted here on this side of the Atlantic is, the taxing digital giants, big American companies. France has gone out on a bit of a limb with its tax on digital revenues. Do you think they're taking a step in the right direction, this being an issue that feeds into the greater inequality question?
Very much they're taking, and I commend Macron for having done that. The fact is, the richest companies in the world are avoiding their fair share of taxes. The example of what Apple did in Ireland sort of brings to mind how Apple and Ireland conspired to make sure that the rest of Europe didn't get their tax revenues.
Or the American tax system either, where arguably they would have paid those taxes.
Exactly, either America or Europe. And they just didn't pay. And at last, France is saying, you can't get away with that. and is beginning to have a big global effect. I mean, France, one country can have a global effect because now there are serious discussions over the issue. What is the best way to make sure they pay their fair share of taxes?
And will the United States sign up to that sort of plan? Because it has to be an international plan. This is the argument of countries like Ireland. You know, if you're going to change the system, it must be across all developed countries. Will the US sign up, do you think?
If we have a new administration in 2021, I believe any of the Democratic candidates all the candidates are committed to a problem of to the proposal of fair taxation, and part of fair taxation is making corporations pay their fair share of taxes. And the worst tax avoiders are these what you call the GAFA. And so I do believe that, and they believe, the Democrats believe in multilateralism, something that Trump doesn't believe in. So the multilateral approach to making sure that all the multinationals pay their fair share of taxes is something that I think you can expect to be spearheaded by the new American administration.
Okay, Joseph Stiglitz, thank you very much for joining us. Your new book, as I say, People, Power and Profits, out now. Thank you very much for being with us. Thanks to you for watching. Do stay with us. The latest news headlines coming up on France 24.